U.S. Department of Education. President Obama nominated her for this position on June 10, 2013, and she was unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate on August 1, 2013. Immediately prior to joining the department, Assistant Secretary Lhamon was Director of Impact Litigation at Public Counsel, the nation's largest pro bono law firm. Before that, she practiced for a decade at the ACLU of Southern California, ultimately as Assistant Legal Director. Earlier in her career, Assistant Secretary Lhamon was a teaching fellow and supervising attorney in the appellate litigation program at Georgetown University Law Center, after clerking for the Honorable William A. Norris on the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. In 2004, California lawyer named Assistant Secretary Lhamon Attorney of the Year for Civil Rights. The Daily Journal listed her as one of the top 20 California lawyers under 40 in 2007, and as one of the state's top women litigators in 2010 and 2007. She received her JD from the Yale Law School, where she was the Outstanding Woman Law Graduate, and she graduated summa cum laude from Amherst College. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Lhamon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Crutcher. It was a lovely introduction, a bit embarrassing. Appreciate it. I'm so delighted to be with all of you to talk about my favorite topic of equity in civil rights and education, and I could not share more strongly the view that Dr. Crutcher expressed, that the need for equity in our educational opportunity in schools is urgent. It's my view that it is every bit as urgent today as it ever has been. And I do not say that lightly, recognizing the long struggle that we have made to try to achieve equal opportunity in this country, in particular in schools. Notwithstanding the very many gains that we have made, and they are many, we are seeing a tremendous rise in graduation rates. We are seeing a diminution in the achievement gap in our schools. We are seeing a cementing of the promise of federal role for educational opportunity and the promise of what civil rights should be in our schools. Notwithstanding all of those things, we are not democratized. We are radically desegregated in our schools. Our schools are not serving all of our students in ways that they are entitled to, in ways that they deserve. We are frankly in crisis in too many of our schools, creating the same old tired message of low value, lack of fairness, and lack of pay for our students. And it turns out we're finding you in different ways in addition to discriminating our students. So we really need to end that practice. We really need to deliver the birthright that is all of our students in schools, and to make sure that we live up to the promises that our Congress has made and that are put to our schools. So I think it is essential that we are here together today in conversation, and I appreciate the beginning of the day saying that this will be a conversation, and that this will be a plan for what we will do today and what we will do every day going forward to make sure that all our students have the rights that they deserve. Before I tell you what it is that we're doing in the Office for Civil Rights, which I lead, I want to concretize why I think it's so important for us to act now, and why it is that our children can't wait. We are, I hope, all familiar with the doll experiment that was one of the linchpins of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, wherein we know that black children were shown white dolls and black dolls and asked which one is better, which one is smarter, and consistently black children chose the white doll without any information about the doll's cognition, which, you know, it didn't have any, and any reason to think that the doll would be better. I think we like to hope that that's our history and that we've learned from it and that we know better now. And I want to tell you from my life before coming to government, when I was a civil rights litigator in California, about an experience I had litigating a case about resource equity in schools, where we hired an expert to come and do focus groups with students about their experience in schools and what they thought about their experience. And I didn't know those kids. We did random digit dialing to find those kids, and I was watching behind a one-way glass to see what it is that the kids would say. And the expert team showed those kids pictures of well-resourced schools that had print-rich environments on the walls, had materials in the classrooms, and that were prepared for kids. And I heard the kids say in those focus groups, those must be schools for white kids. They wouldn't give those materials to us. That was devastating to me. This was in probably 2005, 2006. We had passed too many decades for our kids to be saying that that's what we give to our white kids, that that's not for me. And listening to those kids say that, listening to those kids talk about what they felt in their schools, brought home to me that our kids are hearing the message loud and clear when we don't prepare them in school, when we don't offer them schools that send them the message that we expect them to succeed, that we love them, that we believe in them, that we will teach them, and they'll be ready for them. They get the message that we don't believe in them, that we're not ready for them, and that there is no value in civic engagement, that there is no point in participating productively in their communities. That is exactly the wrong message that we are sending to our kids in school. That is exactly contrary to our vision for what public education is supposed to be and the opportunities that we should be sending to our kids. So we need to know that the doll experiment is not our national past tense. It is our present tense. It is what we are still saying to our children, and we have to own that. We have made some strides toward that ownership. We are seeing real progress. We have now cemented what I think of as a national consensus for civil rights. We have had now, since 1964 forward, the promise that we will not engage in discrimination in our schools on the basis of race, national origin, or color. And since then, we have added sex discrimination and disability-based discrimination as well. And we live that in our schools in a promise, but we don't live it at the desktop in the actual experience of our kids. I want to tell you how I know that. I know that from what I see in schools that I visit. I know that from the data that my office collects, and I know that from the enforcement work that we see. And it is devastating. That starting with our data, we collect and have collected for now many decades a picture of the equity health of conditions in our schools. We call it our civil rights data collection. In this administration, we've made that data public-facing, which means that you all can use it in addition to the ways that we use it, so I hope that you will. I'm going to give you a shameless plug. It's at ocrdata.ed.gov, and I hope that you will make vast and rich use of it. The data is disaggregated by sex, by disability status, by English learner status, by race, so that you can see the equity gains and the equity losses in our schools. Here are kinds of things that we know. Before I tell you, I will say that the most recent data is universal. So these are not projections. These are descriptions of experiences in school for actual children in each instance that I will describe. We know from that that only 50% of our high schools offer calculus to anyone. 50% of our high schools don't offer calculus in them, which means that we are not preparing half of our high school students for high rigor careers, for college. We also know that the lack of preparation is worse if you are of color. So nationwide, just 57% of black students and 67% of Latino students attend high schools that offer the full range of math and science courses. That's compared to 71% of white students. 71% is way too low. 57% is significantly lower. We are not preparing all of our kids for the lives that they will lead when they graduate. We also know from this data consistently over time, black students are 3 times more likely than their white peers to be subject to school discipline. Black boys are 20% of students who receive out-of-school suspensions, while white boys are 6% of students who receive out-of-school suspensions. Black girls are suspended at higher rates than girls of any other race and higher than most boys, with the exception of black boys and Latino boys. We know that more than 1 in 4 boys of color with disabilities receives an out-of-school suspension compared to just 12% of their white peers. So we take a look at this data and we know that we're not offering equity in our schools. One of the things that we learned for the first time in our most recent data collection was that this starts in preschool. We, for the first time, took a look at our preschool offerings our public preschool offerings in the country. And we learned that while black boys are 18% of public preschool students, they're fully 42% of preschool students who are suspended. I want to stop there. Our preschool students are 3 and 4 years old. What are they doing that would require their schools to exit them from school, to send them a message that your behavior is so unacceptable that the adults cannot control you, cannot be with you, you cannot be in school? When we do that, when we send our 3 and our 4-year-olds out of school, we tell them there's no point in trying. We tell them your school will not be ready for you. We cannot be surprised when they misbehave later. We cannot be surprised when they don't feel like school is for them, if that's how we teach them when they start. So we know from that data that we are not seeing equal offerings in school. We also know the data doesn't tell the whole story. So we know that we need to look underneath it and identify what the reasons are, whether there's a reason that needs to be changed, and what it is that needs to be changed. So we do that when we do our enforcement work. But we also know from the data that it tells us that we need to do more collectively than we are doing now, that should not be the experience for our students in school. So one step that we take is to issue guidance that we can share with our schools, with our communities, with our states, about what it is that we expect in school, what the law is, how we will enforce it, and what are practices that schools can take to satisfy the law. We've put out guidance on a pretty wide variety of topics in the last few years that range from charter schools, obligations with respect to the civil rights laws, to the ways to teach English learner students, to ways to address sexual violence in schools. Most relevant to this conversation, we put out a year ago guidance related to resource equity in schools. And in that guidance, we were clear that school finance, instruction materials, teacher preparedness, teacher effectiveness, school facilities, technology access cannot be meted out to students differently on the basis of race. We receive sometimes some criticism when we put out guidance, and I want to tell you that one critic said about that resource equity guidance, and I quote, "Not since the late 1960s has OCR wielded Title VI guidelines so aggressively." I say thank you for that. So we are going to continue with our aggressive wielding of Title VI guidance. Title VI is the federal law that guarantees equal access to educational opportunity on the basis of race and color and national origin. In addition, we put out guidance together with the Department of Justice related to school discipline, and I cited our school discipline statistics. They tell us that we are educating our students away from school. So we put out guidance to say that's unlawful. Here are kinds of fact patterns against which we would enforce. Here are kinds of things that we will do to require school districts to make sure that they do offer education on an equal basis to all of their students. We are very excited when we see school districts, states, come into compliance on their own, when they understand what the law is, when they heed the guidance, and they're able to deliver for their students consistent with what Congress has demanded for the students. And when they don't heed that guidance on their own, I'm very pleased to be the muscular arm of the United States government aggressively enforcing the law for them. So we are very, very active in our enforcement work, trying to make sure that we send a message to all of our school districts all over the country that each one of our 49 million public school students deserves equal educational opportunity. We have received in the life of this administration 1,788 school discipline complaints to investigate, which says that there's quite a bit of concern around the country from people about their experiences of their students with respect to school discipline in school. We also have received 376 complaints related to resource equity, which is equity in access to higher rigor coursework, equity in preparedness for learning in school. We are not surprised with that volume of complaints. We are not surprised that people are telling us that they're not seeing what they should see in school because of what we see ourselves. But we also know that ever since we have been in existence, and we came into existence to enforce the 1964 Civil Rights Act, ever since we came into existence, we have been enforcing school discipline disparities. We saw in our very first desegregation agreements that we entered into and then enforced, including the component of school discipline, because we saw school discipline disparities that many decades ago, which tells us we have not progressed far enough. So in this administration, we have redoubled our efforts. We are trying to be very, very clear with our schools, with our students, with our families, with our educator communities, that our kids cannot miss a minute of learning, that they need to be able to be in school, they need to be able to benefit from what it is that schools have to offer, and we cannot be pushing them out. So I want to tell you some stories, some examples of the ways that we enforce. And I'll start here in Virginia with an example from Lynchburg School District, where we were looking at equal access to high rigor coursework, because our data showed us that in that district we did not see equal access in terms of school offerings and course taking and course success. We also necessarily looked at school discipline as a component because of the concern about pushing kids out of school. We learned in the investigation that the district had very significant disparities in the numbers of black students and white students who take advanced placement and advanced courses in the district. We also learned very high rates of disparities for black students with respect to suspensions. We also saw some very important gains that the district was trying to make, in particular in one elementary school in the district, where before we were doing our investigation, and then during our investigation, the district had already begun taking very important steps. They, for example, had implemented a bullying curriculum in this elementary school, and they had taken steps to limit the number of discipline suspensions. This is, keep in mind, a high-poverty school that was heavily populated with students of color, and the district had begun remedial intercessions, which were one-week periods to work with students at the end of every 6-week, roughly quarter that they were calling them, to address areas of weakness in reading and in math. The success in that elementary school was amazing. In that elementary school, the students were taking and succeeding in math courses in roughly proportional numbers to their presence in the school system itself, which was to say that in the schools that the district might least suspect that kids would be able to perform well and succeed, they could when they had appropriate supports and when the district was focused on what it would take to send a message that they would be ready for those kids. We wanted to see that spread more broadly, because the district was not doing that in the other elementary schools. And so the good news is that the district has now entered into an agreement with us. They've retained an equity consultant to help advise them about the ways that they can take the message of success in that one school and translate it to the rest of the schools in the district, and so that all 8,000 students in the district can benefit from the kinds of success that they were able to see possible in that one school. They also have entered into an agreement about ways to reduce their school discipline disparities and ways to involve the community in what it is that they wanted to do in the school, so that they will take a climate survey that addresses issues related to school discipline, so that they could address how it is that they wanted to be interacting with their students and making sure that every student is ready to learn and respected in the classroom. So we're excited about the forward movement in the district, and also distressed that a district that had that kind of information about what works and that clear indicator of success in one school that they hadn't on their own translated that to the other schools. And we're grateful that they now will do it. Outside of Virginia, we're also doing our enforcement work. So I'm going to tell you another story about an Alabama school district that is 23% black and has 4 high schools. One of those high schools is more than 90% black. This is a district that had achieved unitary status, which means that it had persuaded the court that they no longer segregated on the basis of race and that they would offer equal educational opportunity to all of their students. But until 5 years ago, they'd never offered a single advanced placement course in the high school that was overwhelmingly black. Never. They didn't offer dual enrollment so that students could take classes in community colleges for high rigor courses. They weren't offering international baccalaureate courses. They just, their principal, when we asked why, told us that, well, those kids need remediation. don't think I need to tell you very much to tell you that that's not true. But I will tell you that the black students in the other 3 high schools were taking and succeeding in advanced placement microeconomics, the full range of advanced placement courses that were offered in the other schools. But they just weren't offering it here in this high school because this principal didn't believe in those kids. The good news is that principal is not the principal anymore. The even better news is that the district has entered into an agreement so that they will offer the full range of advanced placement courses in that high school now. They will pay for those students to be able to take dual enrollment courses in community college, and that really matters. This is a rural district. There's 26 miles between the high schools in the district, so absent that agreement from the district, those kids were not going to be able to get to the other schools to take the courses that were offered elsewhere. But even more exciting, the district agreed to go back to kindergarten to evaluate what it would take for the 5-year-olds in the district to believe that they could succeed in high school when they were in those high rigor courses, and what it would take for the teachers in the district to communicate that belief in the students and to prepare them so that they were ready for success in the high rigor courses in high school. So we're really thrilled about the forward movement in that district, and enormously dismayed that what counts as unitary today can mean not offering equal educational opportunity on that core a basis in a district. Lest you think that these kinds of disparities only exist in the South, I want to tell you about my home state of California, where we entered into a resolution agreement last year with a school district outside of Sacramento, when we learned that black students were 4.5 times less likely to be able to be in gifted and talented education than their white peers. And we worked with the district to come up with a plan for ways to expand access to gifted and talented education. And the good news is that they didn't then kick white kids out so that they could bring black kids in, but they expanded it so that they would allow more kids to be able to access their gifted and talented course offerings. And they've opened up access in 42 courses, and kids are taking and succeeding in them now. So I think, you know, when we change our mindsets and we think that we can prepare our kids, we can believe in them, they will be ready for them, they will meet that challenge, and they will be there for success. We also entered into a resolution agreement in New Jersey last year with a district in which black students had only 148 of nearly 800 spots in the district's advanced placement courses, even though the black students were 51.5% of the students in the district. So the district was materially underrepresenting the availability of high rigor courses in that district, and they now don't. So I could tell you lots more details about it, but I will say, time and again, where we see this, we're finding ways to say, you should let the kids in, you should give them a chance to succeed, and when you do, they will. Another example outside the black-white divide in Cleveland, we found a district that had these amazing STEM course offerings, wherein the kids in high school were allowed to watch live surgeries as part of their high school curriculum, which is not offered in my high school. I will say I find that really, really quite amazing that it was available to them, but the seats were going unfilled in these amazing courses in the district. And we thought, why is that happening? You know, here's a district that's offering these great classes. And when we investigated, we learned that the district didn't offer in Spanish the availability of transportation, didn't communicate to limited English proficient families that there would be supports for their kids in the classes if they came, and that they would be welcomed in those classes. And so, you know, this is a district that had a very high population of Spanish-speaking families, and it wasn't communicating that these courses are for you, and we will support you if you come to them. So they now do, and the seats are fully filled, and the kids are getting to imagine themselves in the STEM careers that they're hoping for themselves. Staying with English language learner concern, another New Jersey district in the Jersey Public Schools, Jersey City Public Schools, we investigated English learners' access to the curriculum and whether the district was serving English learners as they're supposed to do. We learned in the course of that investigation that teachers for English learner students very often didn't have the training to teach English learner students, and they weren't receiving supports so that they could develop that training while teaching. Instead, the teachers who were teaching English learner students on average had 10 more students per class than their peers who did not teach English learner students. And the district had devised a plan so that there were particular schools that they thought would be best suited to teach English learner students, so they were busing kids to those schools, but those buses routinely arrived late and left early. so the kids received less instructional time than their peers who were not English learners. So the kids who most needed high-quality instructors, who most needed instructional time in school so that they could perform consistent with their peers, were receiving the least instruction and the least preparedness in school. So again, I'm telling you the story, which is to say that that's over, but it was really shocking to me to find a district that was so under-preparing its students. And staying in the theme of shock, we investigated a Colorado school district where families came to us and said, this district is pushing out its Spanish-speaking staff. It's really discouraging them from even staying in the district. And it's a very hostile environment for its Spanish-speaking students. And we thought, that's probably not happening, but we'll go ahead and we'll investigate. And in fact, it was happening in ways that were astonishing. The district communicated that speaking Spanish is just categorically unacceptable in the district, and so created an environment that was so hostile that many of its Spanish-speaking staff left. There's a little boy who fell on the playground, and he was bleeding in his head. He had a gash in his head, and he went and he asked for help, and the teacher he spoke to didn't speak Spanish, and notwithstanding seeing that he was bleeding, didn't help him. And it took another hour before he got to a teacher who spoke Spanish, who would hear from him, who would actually get him the medical help that he needed, because the district just was refusing to respond because he was a monolingual Spanish speaker and didn't speak English. This is the same district where a principal said to a teacher, you shouldn't really worry about the bathrooms, the mess in the bathrooms, because Mexicans don't know how to clean bathrooms, and so they make messes. I mean, it was, I say that to you and I think, who says that? But it's an actual quote from, it actually happened. It was appalling, the hostile environment that the district was operating for its students and for its staff. The good news is they don't anymore. There's a new superintendent in the district, and he has created a bilingual parent committee that he operates, and he's communicating in Spanish with the families when they come to him, and he's really worked hard to send a message that the staff who had been pushed out are welcomed back, that he will hire them, that they're welcome in that district, and that all families, including the Spanish-speaking families, are respected members of their educational community, and they need to be part of the decisions that are being made in the district. So it's a totally transformed place now, but it was a place that it just had, I think, astonishing facts about the ways that they were educating their students. We also see these kinds of disparities and this kind of ugly treatment with respect to who should be referred for special education evaluation and who should be treated and served in the regular classroom. And I want to be very clear that I think one civil right that students hold in school is the civil right to appropriate services, including disability-based services that they have. And I think you don't refer somebody for evaluation based on race. Both things need to be true. So in this district in New York, we investigated and learned that there were 29 elementary school teachers who taught racially diverse classes, but only referred black students for education intervention. One teacher had 18 students in her class. She described all 9 of the white students as, quote, a joy to have in class, but not one of the black students was a joy to have in class. And in fact, 5 of those were the students that she referred for special education intervention. The students she referred, the black students she referred, didn't have prior discipline records and were succeeding academically, but whereas white students who were a joy and who did not get referred did have discipline records and were not succeeding academically. So they raised a very serious question about understanding what it is that we need to do to serve all of our kids and the best ways to make sure that we deliver for them. And we also are focused not only in the review of instructional time, we're focused on school discipline disparities, qua-school discipline disparities. So sometimes we go in just to look and see what's happening when we see very serious disparities in how students are treated. Like this New York district, with the referrals for special education, we find astonishing differences underneath the numbers in the ways that students are treated with very, very similar kinds of offenses. So in the Minneapolis school district, with which we entered into a resolution agreement just last year, we had a black second grader who was suspended from school for a minor disciplinary infraction, whereas a white second grader threw a rock in class, broke her teacher's sunglasses, and hit another child in the head, and was not suspended, but is instead allowed to work off that infraction by coming in at recess to help the teacher. Very, very different ways of treating like offenses for second grade children, very small children in a district. So that district has agreed to evaluate all of its disciplinary referrals and to determine what would be appropriate and what is not moving forward. Staying with the little kids, in a charter school in the Northeast, we investigated when a parent came to complain to us that her kindergartner was restrained in school, subject to physical restraint, 37 times in a single school year. And the school didn't convene a team to meet to evaluate what would be an appropriate way to interact with this child and figure out what would be an appropriate way to make sure that he could be safe in school. Instead, they told the mother and the grandmother that if they didn't come to school within 45 minutes of a call from the school would refer them to the Department of Children and Family Services. So the school profoundly missing what its obligation is to teach kids and to make sure that the school can serve all of its kids. They've paid for counseling for that child. They've all undergone training. They have a new policy that's dramatically changed. But he was 5 years old when his school sent him the message that nothing he could do would be acceptable at school. So we see stories like that all the time. I'm going to end on one last note of hope in the school discipline range, and then talk a little bit about what I hope that we all will do. But we entered into a resolution agreement with the Oakland Unified School District in California a few years ago, and so now we have a record of their success with their resolution agreement. They had wildly disparate discipline disparities that concerned us. One of the innovations that they entered into as part of the resolution agreement was that they would assign caseworkers to 350 youth who were returning to the district from the criminal justice system. Those caseworkers would work with the kids to figure out which classes would be appropriate for them and ways to stay in school and succeed in school. 76% of those kids have not recidivated. Unbelievable success to be able to work with those kids and say, we will support you, we will help you with your progress and with your return back. So I tell you those stories to say that the work that we do to work on equity is still necessary. It's still crucial in our schools, and we know what works. We have steps that we can take that are successful in our schools. So if we turn the other way, if we actually offer equal opportunity to all of our kids, they will succeed. They will benefit from it. It is valuable. It's worth it. We should do it. We cannot throw up our hands and say that this work is hard, that the courts have restricted the legal tools that we have available to us. This feels like that the challenge is insurmountable. There have been so many times in our history before now where it has felt like an insurmountable challenge. I have to say that when the Brown versus Board of Education litigators were litigating Brown, I cannot imagine that they really expected that they were going to be able to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson, and that they felt like the legal landscape was open to them. I think they felt like they had nothing to lose, that their kids deserved it. We're here in Richmond. I'm going to tell you, my mother was attending racially segregated schools in Richmond, Virginia. This is where she grew up. Before and after Brown versus Board of Education, the schools that she attended never integrated in her lifetime. And she couldn't try on a hat in a department store. She certainly didn't get to ride at the front of the bus. But the Brown decision changed her life, even though it didn't change her school life, because the highest court in the land said that the circumstances of her life were unconstitutional, and that that's not what we stand for as a country. So when she had me, when she had my brother, she raised us to believe that we could be anybody we wanted to be. And she did that as against a time when we hadn't yet had a black president, when public opinion didn't exactly rally behind the life chances of biracial children with a single-parent household. But she still told us, you could be anybody you want to be. And when my brother and I were attending school that was desegregated pursuant to court order and certainly not voluntary, when we were coming up behind her, we grew up in the promise that Brown gave us. We grew up in the belief that she offered us. And my life opportunity has been dramatically different from my mother's. I see from my two children that their life opportunity is dramatically different from mine. And I want more for them. I want more for everybody's baby. We need to remember that each one of the 49 million public school students in school is somebody's precious baby who has hopes and dreams that we should nurture, that we should be able to be prepared for, and that we should do everything it takes to deliver for them because we can, because it's doable, and because they deserve it. And their mothers believe in them, we should believe in them. That's what school is for. So I invite you to join me in whatever way you are willing. Telling you I'm collecting resumes for our office, but if government service is not for you, I invite you to litigate, I invite you to volunteer in your kid's school, I invite you to go to your school board and say that you want more, you want better for our schools because it's essential, and because we can't wait, and because it's time. So thank you for today. I have a little bit of time, I think, for some questions, and I'd love to take them. And I hope that the rest of the day is a productive one, and I really appreciate the energy and the attention for this topic. Thanks. I see a hand in the back.
When parents have concerns that they feel are not being addressed locally, what can they do to get above the local level and have their concerns addressed? And you gave a lot of complaints, but how did those complaints actually get to your office?
So we take complaints, we take all comers essentially. So we have 12 regional offices around the country, and we also have our website. We are, if you Google Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Education, you'll find us. So you can file a complaint online, you can call any of our offices, you can walk into the office. All we need to know is that you have a concern about something that took place at a school, what the concern was, and roughly when it happened. And then it is our statutory and regulatory charge to investigate. So we don't pick and choose. We tend to get about 10,000 complaints a year, and we open every complaint over which we have jurisdiction to investigate. So it's very straightforward to get to us. The areas that we enforce in typically are race, sex, and disability-based discrimination, and it is. I welcome all complaints. I'm happy to take all of them. I'm happiest when we can get our schools to do right in the first instance without having to have enforcement from us. And so I also strongly advocate going to schools saying what it is that you want. And I'm very, very glad for my staff, for myself, to be there behind people whose schools can't listen when they come on their own. But it's very, very straightforward to come to us. Thank you. Yeah?
A lot of school finance is local. What is the obligation of a community that's less affluent to work with a community, provide schools, equal schools?
So just to make sure everybody could hear it, the question is, a lot of school finance is local, and so what is the obligation of less affluent versus more affluent schools to provide equal schools and equal educational opportunity? The right to education is most local, because it is every student's right. And there is no school that is not obligated to provide that right on an equal basis to every student within its charge. So the response that it would be expensive is not a response that we listen to when we are investigating. The federal laws require that no school discriminate on the basis of disability, that no school discriminate on the basis of sex, that no school discriminate on the basis of race. So every school, everywhere in the nation, has the obligation to make sure that every child receives his or her birthright without respect to his station in life, his race, his sex, or his disability status. It can be challenging to deliver educational opportunity without sufficient funds. So I'm not poo-pooing that challenge, but that challenge cannot mean that our schools say, we will invest in some of our kids and not in others, because we think that they're more likely to succeed, because they're easier to educate, because they're our chosen few. The schools have to say, we will deliver for all kids, period.
So about 45 minutes from here, Petersburg City Public Schools is essentially operating an apartheid-style education system here in Virginia, where about 4,000, almost all African-American, economically disadvantaged students have sort of been corralled in a little city school system. And so I'm wondering, and the state has largely just sort of been indifferent to the plight of the students there. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about inter-district segregation and what can be done about that.
Yeah. So among the things that are challenging for lawyers is that the Supreme Court has limited the remedies available for segregation in schools. And one federal limitation, I will say that California, the great state, has better law in state law. But one federal limitation is that the Supreme Court has said you cannot order inter-district busing except on very limited basis going forward. So the challenge where there are islands of segregation and islands of loss of opportunity, can feel great because that particular remedy isn't available to us, and it's the remedy that's most obvious and the one that was working before the Supreme Court took it away. But it doesn't mean that we walk away. It doesn't mean that we then say there's nothing that can be done. There certainly is will available. Where there's will, there's a way, first of all. And the state can say, here are steps that we will take to make this district more attractive. Here are ways that we will support this district. We can invite families back in. It is my belief that we ought to be fighting legal battles. It is also my belief that we as human beings ought to figure out what it is that we want in our schools. And going back to my life in California, before I came here, I was raising my 2 daughters also there. And the district that my kids were in, the Los Angeles Unified School District, had been subject to decades of court-ordered desegregation obligations that included, for some period of time, a requirement for busing. It included pairing of schools. It included operation of magnet schools, a variety of the kinds of tools that people will use to try to desegregate schools. They had varying levels of success and lack of success. The thing that was most successful, and I say this with humility as a lawyer because I fight those desegregation fights in court. I'm very pleased to be able to use the legal tools that we have. But the thing that was most successful was where parents said, this is going to be our school. And they said, this will be our community, and took it back on their own. So where they said, parents going door to door saying, you should send your kid to the neighborhood school. I'm sending my kid there too, and this is what we will do. And we will make it a school that is welcoming to limited English proficient families, so we will communicate in Spanish as well. We will create a play space, and we will stock our library with books. The use of political will really matters, and so I think that we need to be creative as we think about situations like you describe in Petersburg, where we use every legal tool available to us, and we also use the moral suasion, the community force of saying we can make different choices. We don't need somebody to order us to do it. We can take these schools back ourselves. And that is what voting is for. That is what going to the school board is for. That is what talking to your governor is for. That is what civic engagement is for. So I think that there are tools available, even in situations like the one that you described, even though we have some of the most obvious legal tools have been taken away from us.
If you look at where we have challenged schools at the beginning, there are all areas where we have a half-administration policy. And in Richmond is a good example. We recently had a public agency, GRTC, sell a large parcel of land for development with no constraints on it. It's supposed to be developed with big income. I just wonder how in the long run to solve the problem. I know we have to address the problem in short, but in the long run, we see housing policy fitting into the solution.
So I think housing policy matters a lot, and I think I appreciate your long-range and short-range view. I mean, I think we want to make sure the kids who are in 4th grade today are fully served today, and also that we plan for who will want to send their kids to 4th grade at that school going forward. I think that our greatest successes are where we see economic integration, health access integration, as well as education reform, so that we make schools places that people want to be, that we make housing available in communities for a full range of people who would be able to benefit from the community services, and we also offer services in the community so that there's health services and nurse at school, mental health services available for our kids. I mean, those are the best community centers, actually, and those are the best communities. I know for myself as a parent, when I look for schools for my own kids, I'm looking for diversity. I'm looking for places where they will be respected for who they are, and that there will be lots of services available to them. So I think there's no question that the best innovation that we do, the most creative thinking that we have, is the thinking that involves housing fully integrated with schools, fully integrated with health access in our communities. It's absolutely the best way to do the work. And where we aren't doing that, we still can control the schools, and we still can make the schools places that are worthwhile and exciting and can invite people to come to the communities for that as well. So I'm a strong believer in both and.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sunita Sharma, professor at Virginia Union University here in Richmond. I appreciate what you talked today. It was useful information. I taught in Florida, Alabama, Midwest, and I'm here now in the school system and at the universities. Now, my observation of the special ed overrepresentation of minorities, particularly blacks in special ed, for example, what I have noticed is that, as this gentleman said about the poverty, the background the students coming from, the part of the reason for them is the lack of education on the part of the parents. I have sat in meetings with the parents of special ed children. They are not aware of, they're not aware of what all is there for them to stand and take a stand for their children, actually. So whatever the school system will tell them, they easily observe, they believe in that and accept it. On the other hand, other people, whites or anyone, I would say, is more of education or awareness of what all is there. People take a stand, fight for their rights, put their children where they want them to be served. Yeah, and the teachers, majority of the teachers, I would say, are presently the critical shortage of teachers in special education, math and sciences and so forth. And the teachers, those who are filling in are, we call them career switchers. Those, they have a background in other areas and they're put in classroom. It's like on-job training. They have not gone through the rigor of the teacher education programs. So there is not really a one reason for all the issues that we are addressing. It's like the whole system has to be kind of need overhauling.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's no question that there's not one reason why we are where we are in schools. I mean, we are where we are because we haven't cared enough as a country, period. And beyond that, all the pieces that fill that umbrella are many and disturbing. But that means we should start caring, right? And I certainly don't think that the challenge is the families, or it's the fault of the families when the kids aren't being served. The obligation of schools is to take every kid for who that kid is and find a way to serve that kid, period. So families shouldn't have to advocate for their kids to get the services that their kids are entitled to. An entitlement means you get it. An entitlement means your school delivers it for you. And the definition of instructional leadership is figuring out what it is that the kids in your school need and delivering. So I absolutely see what you describe, which is that there are families who are better able to advocate for their kids and then able to get more, but that's not the system that we said we were setting up. That's actually not the lawful system. So it's not what should be happening in schools, and we should demand more. We should say that it doesn't require that level of advocacy to be able to have your kid able to graduate. The level of advocacy required for your kid to be able to graduate should be your capacity to register, period. And then your kid should be able to succeed in school. I think I'm taking us over time, so thank you very much. I really enjoyed the time.